So the iPhone 12 mini was one of those iPhones that kind of surprised us when it came out in 2020, mostly because this was the first time we saw a reintroduction of a smaller iPhone. And what I will tell you is that this iPhone sits in a very interesting spot because it's not super old. Apple is still selling it brand new, but the successor of this phone is so much better than this one that it really just doesn't make any sense to pick up this device when the 13 mini you can pick up for a little bit more, and it's a much better device in pretty much every single area. So if you want to pick up this iPhone, I probably wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to pick up the 13 mini, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now with the iPhone 12 mini on the front, we have a 5.4 inch Super Retina XDR OLED panel, and this screen is still very good for the most part. I've had very few issues with this type of panel, and I think even now in this day and age, mostly because the iPhone 13 mini has the same panel, we are all pretty much used to it, so it's not a big deal. This screen is still very good. It's a full HD panel. There's no ProMotion or anything like that, but I haven't really found it to be a big deal, and I still think this is a pretty good looking screen for sure. Now you have a little bit of bezel, you have the notch up top, but nothing crazy. You have the lightning port at the bottom, and on the back you have the standard glass back, which still looks pretty good. It still feels pretty good, and you have that dual camera setup as well. Now the funny thing about this phone is that it's so small that it just feels like it just can easily fall out of your hands or something, but it does have a pretty decent, heft to it. It's not really heavy, but I guess if you put on like a, Apple case on it or something, maybe it'll add some, heftiness to it, because if you're walking around with this thing without a case on, it can definitely feel like it's just like nothing in your hands. Now that pretty much covers it up on the outside. You have things like wireless charging, IP certification, things like that, but the rest of the things we'll get into in a second. But we do have a camera setup on this thing, obviously, and this thing has that dual camera setup on the back, a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, then a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor, and on the front we have another 12 megapixel camera. Now on the front and the back we can do 4K at 60, which is always good to see. We can film in that really high resolution, which is nice, and this camera compared to the iPhone 13 mini and all the other iPhones that came out, it's still a very good camera. Like I mentioned before, I don't really have too many things to complain about, and when you have a phone like this, you are pretty much set for a while. There's some things about this phone that I'm not really a huge fan of, but the camera is not one of those things. This is still a very good camera for sure, especially if you're using apps like Snapchat and those type of apps like Instagram. Those applications utilize pretty much everything that these cameras have to offer. You still get better photos and just more features on the stock camera app, but those applications really take use of the full advantages of the iPhone camera. So you're going to get really good quality photo and video from this specific phone on those specific applications, but you still have things like super slow mode, you have portrait mode, and you have a lot of different things like that. So in my opinion, this is still a very good camera. It's not a perfect camera. You're missing things like a telephoto lens, you're missing like cinematic mode that we have on the newer phones, and like no Pro RAW, the newer resolutions we can film in, but this is still a very good camera, and like I mentioned, I don't really have too much to complain about here. So in terms of the camera setup, that pretty much covers it up. Now in terms of the longevity, I kind of think that the iPhone 12 mini may last as long as the iPhone 13 mini. I don't know if this is going to be 100% be the case, but in terms of iOS support and just the longevity of software, that's the only thing I kind of see happening. And the reason I think that is mostly because the size. The iPhone 12 mini is the same size as the iPhone 13 mini, and I know that sounds so corny, but when you think of the future of the mini lineup, the rumors are stating that the 12 mini and the 13 mini are going to be the only mini phones that Apple's going to make. It doesn't seem like they're going to make a 14 mini based on all of the leaks that I've been hearing. If they do end up doing it, then this is going to change up what I say. But if they don't, well then it could potentially be the case where the 12 mini and the iPhone 13 mini, aka the 12 lineup and the 13 lineup, pretty much last the same amount of time in terms of software updates. We've seen the same thing happen with the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 5S, and we kind of saw the same thing happen with the iPhone 4S and the iPhone 5. And we kind of saw this happen with some other phones too. So this could end up being the case. We don't know like for 100% sure, but if I had to guess, that's pretty much what I would say. So in terms of software, it's still supported, it's still beautiful, and I have no issues at all with iOS besides iOS 15 needing to be improved like crazy. But other than that, that pretty much covers it up there. Now in terms of the performance side of things, the iPhone 12 mini has that Apple A14 Bionic chip inside of it with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now one thing is for sure with the iPhone 12 mini, this is still a very good good performing phone. I've had pretty much zero issues in terms of performance with these type of iPhones, and the whole entire iPhone 12 lineup is extremely fast. Now the good thing about the 12 mini is that it is pretty much the same type of speed and performance as the iPhone 12. So when you compare an iPhone 12 mini and you compare an iPhone 12 in terms of the speed and everything, you're pretty much getting the same type of performance, which I actually think is pretty cool. Now when compared to the iPhone 13 mini, the interesting thing is the iPhone 13 mini still kind of performs the same as the iPhone 12 mini. From all the speed tests that I did, from all the comparisons that I did, that was one thing that I pretty much saw. Now that did kind of freak me out because I wanted to get a much better performing phone, and I don't think you're really going to be getting it from the 13 mini. The 12 mini's performance is still very, very good, and it's funny because it's in such a small package that you would just assume that, oh my goodness, this phone can't handle everything I throw at it, or that the iPhone 12 is faster because it's bigger. But that's not always the case. In this specific situation, because of the iPhone 12 mini's body, it gives the impression that it may not be as fast as it could be or as it should, but this is still a very fast phone. For light apps, things like note-taking, texting, messaging, things like that, still a very good phone. Very few complaints from me for this specific situation, but even those higher intensive applications, or even if you're video editing, you're really not going to be getting too many complaints from this type of phone. And as I mentioned, this is a really good performing phone in this day and age. So in my opinion, in reality, everything you're going to be throwing at it, it's still going to be able to handle pretty much everything at that point. It's not perfect, like I mentioned. There's some complaints I had, from here and there, but in terms of the overall performance, it's still a very good performing phone in this day and age. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now, hitting on probably the worst area of this specific phone, which is the battery life. Now, it has a 2,227 milliamp hour battery, and the battery life of this iPhone was probably the biggest complaint when compared to the other iPhones, things like the iPhone 12s and even the iPhone 11. It was a downgrade, which you would expect because it's a smaller size, but you would want to, this wasn't a cheap phone. It was still, like $699 or something, which is still pretty expensive. And this was taking the price tag of the iPhone 11. So because of that, you would assume that this battery life would be the same as the iPhone 11, and it wasn't. So when you factor that in with iOS 14, the beginning of iOS 14 not being that strong, and even now with iOS 15, the battery life of these iPhones have been going down like crazy, and the iPhone 12 mini I think is one of those devices that's affected quite a bit. So the battery life is probably the one area that I'm not a huge fan of, and that's kind of expected. You have a smaller phone, so that's kind of what happens. But in my opinion, that's the one thing I would kind of wish with this device, that it kind of were to improve a little bit. But again, what are we going to do? There's not much we can do about it at this point, and that's really the one reason why I would probably sway away from picking up this device. It's just because of the battery life. So in terms of that covers it up there. So to kind of sum it up, to be honest, I think the iPhone 12 mini is still kind of worth it in 2022. If it was, because of the size, then, I would say go for it. But the thing is that the iPhone 13 mini is a very good successor to the iPhone 12 mini. And I probably would recommend, if you're planning on buying these iPhones brand new, I would just recommend spending the extra money and going to buy the iPhone 13 mini, because that is definitely a worthwhile upgrade. That is definitely going to be getting you a much better phone, in my opinion. A way better battery life, kind of better cameras, kind of better performance, but that battery life was my main issue, and the iPhone 13 mini has kind of fixed it. So in my opinion, that's kind of what I would recommend doing. And if you want to pick up an iPhone 13 mini, like I mentioned, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support their channel at the same time. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.